Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to the INSEAD seminar, Distributed Ledger Business Models, How to Build Minimal Viable Ecosystems. It's my pleasure to meet with you virtually this morning, evening, and afternoon. My name is Andrew Shipilov. I'm a professor of strategy at INSEAD. And I have the honor to welcome three executives from the distributed ledger business ecosystem. Wilfried Pimenta de Miranda, who is a director of business development at IOTA Foundation. Cotti, who is a managing director of Center of Excellence Banking and Trade at Polo Network. And Sean Kiernan, who is the founder and CEO of DAG Global Holding Limited. This is a part of a series that we have started a few months ago at INSEAD. And the objective is to learn and to share with you some of the most recent case research that we have done. And in case you like this webinar, we would also invite you to the ones that are coming in the next few weeks. So there will be one on blockchain for supply chains, hype versus reality on Thursday, November 5th. And then there will also be another webinar, The Paradox of Privacy, on Tuesday, the 10th of November. All of them are hosted by INSEAD faculty and community members. So what we're going to do today with you is we will just give you a bit of an introduction to this whole INTHECASE webinar series. We'll go through the sort of what we would call etiquette. So how do we communicate in this format? I will give a brief intro to the IOTA case study, Distributed Ledger Business Models, How to Build Minimal Viable Ecosystems. Then Wilfried will talk about IOTA's current projects. There will be some discussion between me and Wilfried as to where IOTA is going to next. Then we will open up this discussion, and then Daniel and Sean will join in. We will learn about the business models and partnerships that both Polo Network and DAG Global Holding have been building. Then there will also be a Q&A of all panelists with the audience, and I would strongly encourage you throughout this webinar, do use the Q&A session part of the Zoom functionality. Post a question. If you like the question, do upvote it, and towards the end, we will get an opportunity to see which were the most upvoted questions. We will try to discuss them with the panelists. Now, just to give you a bit of an overview as to why we're doing this. So as you know, INSEAD is a leading business school in the world, and case teaching is one of the methods that we use extremely effectively here. INTHECASE is a deep dive into recent cases published by INSEAD together with the case protagonists. So if you've ever been to an MBA classroom or executive education classroom, it's not just to read the case, but also to speak with the people who are the part of the case studies. These are insights into the best practices and frameworks driving success in the companies. And we do have about 2,000 cases that you could visit and read at publishing.insead.edu. And I also want to extend a special thank you to Anne-Marie Carrick, who was the researcher and the case writer behind this specific case. Anne-Marie, if you're here, thank you very much. I really like working with you, and I hope that we can continue producing amazing cases together. Since we like to hear from you and would like to learn about your experiences, and the best way to learn about your experiences and the expectations regarding distributed ledger technologies, blockchain, and so forth, I wanted to begin with a quick poll. So I will ask our colleagues to show the poll, and you should be able to access it by just clicking the poll button on the top. And you will see a few questions. There are 3 of them, actually. What is your experience with DLT? You can give us multiple answers. I own cryptocurrencies. I am a DLT entrepreneur or VC. I work for a regulator that oversees DLT. I want to work for a DLT-enabled company. I work for a company that would like to use DLT, so something in the future. I'm just curious. And for those of you who just randomly stumbled upon this webinar, if you're in the wrong webinar, let us know as well. Then the next one, do you think that there are companies and sustainable business models that have successfully monetized DLTs today outside the speculative crypto space? And do you agree with Warren Buffett that Bitcoin is probably rat poison squared? So let's see what you folks think about. We've got over 130, I think, attendees, and that number is increasing. So we are getting answers to these questions. So we'll just wait until we have more answers. Okay, so still 30 people. Will still give you an opportunity to finish up your answers. $109. Okay, so 111, there's still people voting. All right, so there's 83% of those who sign up for the webinar have voted. Yeah, it's unlikely by now that the answers are going to change dramatically. So yeah, so maybe just close it and I will share the results. And so this is what we see. We see that the majority of you are curious. However, about 20 people say I own cryptocurrency. We have a DLT entrepreneurs, 13%. We have a single person who works for a regulator that oversees DLTs. Some folks want to work for a DLT-enabled company. Some would work for a company that would like to use DLT, that the majority were just curious. And 5 of you are in the wrong webinar. So, but if you stick around, we hope you may learn something about DLTs as well. Now, what's interesting is the majority of you thinks that there are companies and sustainable business models that have successfully monetized DLTs today outside of the speculative crypto space. This is really good. And most of you actually disagree with Warren Buffett that Bitcoin is probably rat poison squared. That's interesting. So we should let Buffett know that maybe he's wrong, but I guess he is used to being wrong. And we will see that over the next few years, whether he's right or wrong with that statement. Okay, well, with that insight, let's dive into the case study. And why did we write this case? Well, I had an idea of writing a case study about blockchain technologies when I lost money on cryptocurrencies in 2017. I thought, well, I lost some money. That was sort of stupid of me. Of course, I should have listened to Buffett, but maybe there's something to learn about there as well. And Wilfried and I connected because he is an INSEAD alumnus. And at INSEAD really like working with our alumni too, so they could teach us about the world, and we help them think structurally what's happening out there. So as you know, in many case studies, if not in all of them, there is an opening paragraph where some protagonist has a problem. So what is Wilfried's problem? Well, he's joining the IOTA project as director for business development in the early 2017. And he has to demonstrate the potential of IOTA technology and increase adoption. And the IOTA project is an open community program. They wanted to engage with external market players to kick off the proof of concept for the use of their technology. They were working with lots of different industrial companies, public sector organizations, and the number of nascent smart cities. And of course, in my mind, this is an interesting technology, almost like a hammer. And they were looking to sort of what would be the useful nail with which we could sort of build a home. And the key questions in this case, so how should IOTA scale up beyond showcasing the initial set of use cases? How could IOTA team engage with market players to trigger the exploration of new business models? And IOTA Foundation is a non-for-profit. So how could it branch out beyond donations and government grants and find new sustainable sources of funding? And so essentially, how does Wilfried and his team take this new technology and find a use cases for it? Now, of course, you may be asking, okay, so you folks are using the term distributed ledger technology. So what is it and how is that different from blockchain or from Bitcoin? So I've got a couple of definitions from the sources I'm referencing here in the bottom of the slide. And for many of you, this may not be very new, but DLTs are shared digital ledgers that use cryptographic algorithms to verify the creation and transfer of digitally represented assets or information over a peer-to-peer network. And they add a new layer of trust into the internet, offering new level of data sovereignty, making it possible to create digital assets that are both scarce and non-falsifiable. Now, of course, DLT differs from traditional databases. They are physically decentralized. Copies of the same data are stored in different locations. If one node goes down, the ledger remains accessible. There is no need to trust any party in the network. Data integrity in the DLT is protected by immutability. DLT does not allow changes to be made after the transaction is confirmed and written in the ledger. And of course, there's the element of shared governance. Public ledgers are open and regarded as censorship resistant. So how do other technologies sort of compare to DLTs? Well, essentially, not all distributed ledgers are blockchains. So what are blockchains? Well, blockchains is a technology that allows, of course, just as any other technology in the DLT, they enable people to send data to a counterparty they don't know. There are cryptographic signatures or hash which facilitates this, and blockchain is composed of blocks. They are sequential, and each block contains the cryptographic hash of the previous block, a timestamp, and transaction data. But then what some industry experts are saying, think of blockchain and distributed ledger in the same way you might think of Kleenex and facial tissues. The former is the type of the latter, but it has become so popular that it became ingrained in people's minds as to what the product is. So in a nutshell, there is a big universe of DLTs. Blockchain is a part of it. Bitcoin is a smaller part of course, blockchain. But there are other technologies that allow the same DLT processes, and they have other features than blockchain. And IOTA Tangle is one of those. So as I was writing the case, I always asked Wilfried, so Wilfried, is Tangle blockchain? And his answer was always no. So to the IOTA team, and I suppose increasingly to the outside world, IOTA Tangle is the DLT for the IoT and M2M. So I put a smiley face because there's too many acronyms here. So IOTA Tangle is a distributed ledger technology for the Internet of Things and in the near future machine-to-machine communication. And the key difference between blockchain and Tangle, which of course are both a part of the DLT space, is that Tangle doesn't need a block data structure based on the direct acyclic graph architecture, and it's designed to meet the requirements of the IoT machine-to-machine environment, in particular high speed, which blockchain or especially Bitcoin may be lacking, scalability, zero fees. Again, Bitcoin, Ethereum, all of these technologies, they have fees for the use of the ledger. Low energy consumption. Again, this is something fairly unique to Tangle. And quantum security in preparation for the arrival of quantum computers. So this is an amazing technology with sort of really interesting potential. But of course, the big question is, how do you create value with the new technology? And I've been studying how companies worked with new technologies and created value by working with partners and by building ecosystems. So for me, IOTA was a really interesting case because this is an ecosystem in the process of construction. And when we discussed with Wilfried the different aspects of the case, what struck me is that in innovation research, there's a lot of talk about MVPs, right? So you've heard that many times. What is an MVP? Minimally viable product. If you want to launch your business, the minimal thing you need is an MVP. But what if you have an amazing technology, but you do not have an MVP with that technology? And technology by itself does not constitute an MVP because it's just an enabler for something else. So when we discussed with Wilfried, it seemed like IOTA was moving towards something interesting. Since they initially did not have an MVP, they had a technology but not a product, they wanted to build what they called minimally viable ecosystems. And so minimally viable ecosystems are a group of partners, ideally not direct competitors, who work to figure out the use cases for the new technologies such as IOTA. And they want to co-create and share the learning without any middlemen and make sure that IOTA is accepted by many parties. So in the case, we talk about the technologies, we talk about the challenges that Wilfried is facing, and we do talk about how did they go about building minimally viable ecosystems. But of course, the advantage of having Wilfried on the webinar with us is to us being able to ask these questions of him as to how did IOTA go about building minimally viable ecosystems, what worked, what did not work, and most importantly, where is IOTA now? Has IOTA and their team figured out a way to create value from this technology and to some extent capture the value that this technology potentially can be unlocking? So for the time being, I will stop and I will allow Wilfried to share his slides, share his remarks about IOTA, and then I will come back in a dialogue with Wilfried and other panelists. Wilfried, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Andrew. Let me see, I'm just going to pop up my screen. There we go. So thanks a lot. I'm thrilled to participate to this webinar and also take a different tune to a lot of our conversation we have. Usually we talk a lot with industry partners and are probably in a sales modus, but today we can allow ourselves to be a bit more analytical and assess a bit how we are doing or how the industry is generally moving. So I'll have a few slides talking about IOTA. And before I actually talk about IOTA, I would like to talk about the general frame of the problem statement we're trying to address. So any technology is just an enabling technology. And we say, you know, often blockchain is looking for a purpose. I wanted to reframe a bit what IOTA is built for. So the project was initiated back in 2012, 2013 in the minds of the co-founders. And it was preparing for what we can see, you know, in the new data economy and the convergence between different types of technologies like the cloud, but we could now argue the multi-cloud environment, Internet of Things and artificial intelligence. And all this new environment, here you see an illustration of a typical smart city environment where you will have all those different technologies being combined for new value and new business model. Data is the new oil and people will go for it, try to fetch it. There will be cybersecurity issues. They are here already. We have e-privacy concerns and a general big issue related to interoperability. So those are really challenges facing us. And DLT or blockchain has a sort of promise with regards to this environment. The real-time human-centered solutions we want to develop and the cost-efficient automated processes will bring those technologies and those challenges. So the project of the IOTA Foundation was initiated before the foundation itself. As I said in 2013, the first line of codes were set up in 2015, and we went in a journey to set up the IOTA Foundation as a non-for-profit. This was registered in Germany in 2017, and we've grown the team from 4 to about 110 employees today across 23 countries. And the main deliverable of the IOTA Foundation is its open source distributed ledger called the IOTA Tangle, which is a sort of alternative to blockchain. And the initial design was to really focus on the IoT requirement, this idea of machine-to-machine enablement and economy. So the idea that eventually autonomous systems and different types of agents, autonomous electric vehicles and so on will be able to interact with the environment and participate to the economy by trading, by paying themselves. And this needs to have a different type of backbone, a secure backbone that can ensure the data streams and also orchestrate the value transfer between the different agents. The heart of our technology is the IOTA tangle, so it's different from blockchain because it doesn't have any block, like Andrew mentioned. It's open source. We belong to the permissionless and public ledgers. You could assimilate this bucket with what, for instance, Ethereum or Bitcoin is doing. What Hyperledger, for example, is doing is more private blockchain. So this is different. The permissionless and the public approach also enables the idea of digital assets or cryptocurrencies to be orchestrated through those types of ledgers. It's a scalable one. So one key attributes of our technology is to make sure that we have an increasing amount of transactions being orchestrated through the ledger. It's a must for the IoT. It's enabling fee-less data and value transactions. And there's a distinction between those two. A data could be really related to securing and verifying a data set. And in our case, because we don't have any fees and no miners, you can tackle data separately from value. So we have a function of digital currency or digital asset that is actually an option with regards to the use of the ledger. We're fit for IoT, so we focus very much in embedding the IOTA enablement at the level of the IoT hardware, at the IoT edge, to provide all the security components. And it has generally a low energy requirements. So the nodes that are supporting the ledger are not consuming a lot of energy, and that relates to how the protocol is designed in a more efficient way than traditional blockchains. The type of value added that we bring can fall into those types of buckets. There's different ways, of course, to interpret the potential of the technology. But data trust is where it starts. Usually, we use blockchain distributed ledger IOTA to provide data trust in open ecosystems. When we are in the IoT domain, it becomes quite obvious if you take a smart city context, where all the data will go from API to API, from silo to silo. We need to be able to trace where the data is coming from, bring a degree of confidence in the data provenance. There's a lot of things that can fall under the data trust. There's also the idea of developing digital identity systems that can apply to humans, organizations, but now also IoT devices. So we call them machines. All those things are things we tackle at the IOTA Foundation using our technology as a backbone. And when you look at this data trust bucket, it doesn't employ digital currencies or digital assets. That's a very specific attributes of IOTA, is that you can leverage the technology open source just to tackle that data trust. Many organizations are businesses and they seek to develop monetization mechanism, of course, and be competitive on the market. And so monetization becomes important. Data is the new oil. We want to get paid for it. And we have a way to get value transfer orchestrated very efficiently. And this is where you have the IOTA token, which is a specific cryptocurrency that is utilizing IOTA Tangle as the backbone. We provide also different types of modules and tools that helps automation in general. And I'll come back with example afterwards. We work across different industries, mobility, global trade and supply chain, smart cities, energy, telco, digital identity, e-health, industrial IoT, and climate and environment. There's different industries moving at different pace. We initiated a lot of our first proof of concept in the mobility sector, being registered in Germany in the middle of Industry 4.0 trends and a strong automotive industry. Germany is very advanced actually in understanding the potential of blockchain for IoT and Industry 4.0. But since then, we've moved across different industries, and I'll explain also, provide some specific example. One of the projects we've done, and you could simulate this to some degree to some minimal viable ecosystem, but it's more focused on the value chain of IoT and data. So this is a cooperation with Dell Technology and the Linux Foundation and other parties that are coming together to leverage on IOTA and other techs to provide a confidence fabric. So this is the idea to go all the way to the IoT edge and be able to track where the data is coming from and orchestrate the different functionalities around access to those data sets. And that's going to be very, very important as we start to build KPIs and start to monetize the data through a sort of new value web of applications. Eventually, even out of AI engines, we will need to be able to make sure that the data that was feeding those processes was indeed authenticated and verified coming from trustworthy sources. So that's the aim of this specific project that will be open source. And so very interesting project Alvarium case to follow up. To some extent, we can use different IOTA components to fulfill some of those promises around track and trace functionalities that is often discussed in supply chain. Another example, focusing, for instance, on the machine-to-machine value transfer I mentioned earlier, is a project that Jaguar Land Rover is driving themselves. It's a car e-wallet to allow their vehicles to be able to trade with its environment. So basically to pay for different data streams, but also get paid. And you can utilize this car wallet technology to enable value transfer for parking, for charging when it comes to electric vehicles, for tolling, new functions around road user charge, which is a way to sort of pay per use for different roads. One of the case they mentioned themselves earlier on was the idea of monetizing the data transfer related to the detection of potholes in the street. So the vehicle could participate to identifying some jobs to be done on the road. So they would send this information to the authorities, for example, and get rewarded for it. A third example here is around automation. And so this is coming to relatively sophisticated versions of applications, but this is around creating decentralized energy marketplaces and fulfilling the promise of peer-to-peer energy. So the idea is to basically register all different types of energy assets. They are now becoming smart, so they're connected to internet. And we can help them participate to referencing their energy consumption or production if you're a prosumer. And all this information is fed in algo trading mechanisms, which determine a price, does a supply-demand matching, and we are able to feed back this information back to the different energy assets so that it can be controlled, incentivized to behave in different ways. And the full version of this, of course, is to allow even the machine-to-machine payment so that, for instance, a smart meter could pay another one at the end for together balancing the local grid. So this is a project that is done through different mechanisms. We have a Horizon 2020 project. This is a granted project from the EU together with partners. Some key components I wanted to bring forward here around the business model part. Out of our technology, there's some concept that will be very interesting to leverage in the future that has a transformative nature. So track and trace of physical and digital assets is one that is understood now in supply chain in particular. But if you continue the journey, we are working to have decentralized digital identities for people, organization, and machines. So IoT will be able to participate to the economy autonomously. You will have different business models leveraging on the idea of automated pay-per-use. And the emergence of new concept called autonomous economic agents. And so this is the idea, for example, of having a drone or autonomous electric vehicle being able to participate autonomously in an open market and do its job, either working as a taxi or others. A high potential around the IOTA is the idea of decentralized digital marketplaces. There's a complexity in those models because a governance around data and liabilities and so on are things we need to flesh out. And so this is stretching sometimes the border of the existing regulatory framework. But those are high potential for both public sector and private sector. I'll probably go quickly through this, but this introduces the idea of how do we work with the partners. There's different levels to our work as a non-for-profit. So we work towards standardization on different bodies. In the telco, we have TM Forum, which is a global alliance of telcos. MOBI, which is the blockchain alliance for the mobility sector, and other types of key institutions working with IoT or open source. Tangle.ee is a way to bring some of our partners together where they can co-develop some of the key layer 2 components, very useful for innovation. We have a dynamic community involving both developers, freelancers, but also research and academics. We drive actively partnerships. And then this can be done through open innovation. We've done some of those pilots in the past. And now we have moved towards this idea of R&D grants. So we systematize the teaming up with different parties to do research and development and demonstration projects. And we have professionalized the support service. So IOTA can be, let's say, hired as the IOTA expert to complement the capabilities of either IT integrators or consultants or the problem owners themselves. So that's quite a lot of work in terms of engagement, and that probably illustrates how important it is to collaborate to identify models. I have a slide here that may have been actually mentioned even in the case. This is how, in practice, we've done to bring together different parties, combining access to a real smart city environment in Norway, in Trondheim, under the City Exchange Consortium, and inviting different parties like Jaguar and Rover, or NG Lab, the energy utility, and all combining their capabilities, either from a car wallet technology or local energy market using IOTA, to demonstrate yet a new functions, which would be allowing the electricity provenance from a local energy all the way to an electric vehicle that basically wants to charge green. So there's a lot of innovation potential that will be unleashed by combining the capabilities. And so one of the ideas behind the minimal viable ecosystem is that in a way, 1 + 1 = 3. There's more to it than the individual leverage. And how to unleash this is because there are new business models, and they are very much linked to this idea of collaboration rather than competition. And what is the role of IOTA into this is basically an enabling digital infrastructure. So that's a sort of new component. We are used to the idea of a sort of built environment and civil infrastructure, maybe in smart city, for example. But now there's a new type of digital infrastructure that is emerging, where DLT or blockchain will probably play a key role.
So Wilfried, this is a really good introduction to our discussion, and really good to have you here with us. And so from your perspective, what are the current barriers for adoption for IOTA technology?
So IOTA belongs to a greater, let's say, DLT industry, right? And we are still at early stage. So there's some educational work to be done to really explain the fundamental of the technology. And there's been some, let's say, misleading steps initially because everybody thought blockchain is Bitcoin. And as we all know, Bitcoin has an unfortunate assimilation with speculative play and the financial drive behind this. So a lot of our work aims at explaining the difference between cryptocurrencies and DLT. And in our case, as you can see from my presentation, those technologies can be really leveraged separately from cryptocurrencies just for providing a secure digital trust layer, which people are really looking for. And it takes some time. And one thing we've noticed also is that this idea of providing enhanced security and privacy is something for the public good. And of course, business has a responsibility to engage into this, but maybe a more natural stakeholder group is actually public sector. And we are, through our projects, for instance, in Norway, in Trondheim, working with the municipality. This is public sector starting to get geared for the digital transformation. So they're heavily developing their skills, and you need basically have an innovative mindset. And so when public sector also gets there, you start to be able to define this idea of a public good, a digital infrastructure for everyone to harvest. And it's likely that the public sector will have a strong role in fostering the development of that layer. And business will leverage on a common infrastructure for all. So when you wrap this together, because we of course want to unleash this potential fast, one of the big challenges is to say, how do we allow agile public-private partnerships to happen?
Right.
And that's
essentially, it seems like you're making a pivot from building a technology for the public sector, because I know that the many German companies like Bosch, for example, they were investing in the early sort of versions of IOTA, and they were buying the tokens in advance. And now you're saying you're bringing the public sector into the play, and presumably because they could legitimate the technology, and they're engaging in sort of energy business and building the infrastructure, which single sort of private company would not be able to do. But
yes, I think it's the idea of standardization, right? So who is the more legitimate player to bring a degree of standardization and ensure that we really serve the needs of the end user, to the citizens? So it's not like we're pivoting towards public sector. I think it's the only recognition that DLT is likely going to be part of the critical digital infrastructure of the future. And private sector and public sector needs to work together to find the balance.
Interesting. Let me ask you last question before we shift to a conversation also with Sean and Daniel. Do you lose sleep over competition, over some competition? So who do you think is the closest competitor to IOTA? I know I cannot resist asking this question because I'm a strategy professor.
Yeah, see, to be honest, I think our strongest competition is the legacy systems, right? So one of the challenges in blockchain is that there's a lot of ideas, right? There's a lot of promise. And the competitive arena, when you bring this to the real world, talking to real players, conventional companies or public sector, you can basically screen out a lot of players already, right? So the real DLT actors engaged in real business environment is very thin. And our experience is that we're not necessarily arguing against different types of DLTs. The usual conversation is, how does DLT adds value in the first place, right? We need to go through that. And you need to have this innovative mindset, as I explained, from all different types of parties. And once you've gone through this, in our case, we have a lot of attributes that fits specific type of applications. So, and that's the idea of IoT, where you need to have a scalable ledger for processing a lot of micro transactions. And in that domain, there's not a lot of conventional blockchains that can fulfill the requirements. Also, as we move forward, we realize when we do public-private partnership and public sector is involved, they may not necessarily be jumping with excitement on the idea of using a cryptocurrency-based infrastructure. So some of the permissionless projects like Bitcoin or Ethereum may have this cryptocurrency elements brought forward by default. But the public sector is mainly interested in the benefits, not DLT. They want security. They want to have new means of providing confidence around data exchange. How do we tackle privacy and GDPR compliance? This is not related to cryptocurrency. So that's typically an approach.
So you seem, well, you seem like you're sleeping well. You're not losing sleep over competition.
Yeah, no. I think we're good, and yeah.
Okay, Lovely. So let's bring in Danielle and Sean into the conversation. So gentlemen, could you please unmute yourselves? And yeah, so thank you for coming over and thank you for being a part of our conversation. Maybe let's start with your introductions. So maybe let's start with Danielle. If you could maybe briefly tell us about yourself. So what is your background? And how long have you been in the DLT space? And of course, what does Marco Polo Network do?
Yeah, thank you very much. So I'm, for all my sins, I'm a banker. I worked over 30 years in banking in Switzerland and in the UK, and have joined the DLT space in 2017. So I have transformed from a banker, and in banking, I was really focused on commercial banking and specifically on trade finance. And the Marco Polo, so actually I work for a company called TraderX, who has two roles. Is a platform and software developer and the business network operator for the Marco Polo network, offering apps for working capital and trade finance. So the Marco Polo business network is a decentralized network, leveraging the core network of nodes to provide decentralized platforms and apps that allow trading partners, financial institutions, and the extended trade finance ecosystem to connect, communicate with each other.
And so what would be a specific example of a use case? So I'm a bank. How can I use your network?
It's a true multi-product, multi-bank scenario. So actually, it's the corporate that is the driver. The corporate, either buyer or seller of underlying goods, either domestic or cross-border, has a funding or a financing need somewhere along his journey where he sells the goods. And he is connected through our network with the banking community to share data points like invoices, purchase orders, or other logistics data on the network that then allows the bank to do either the financing or the payment.
So if I want to do the payment, or if so that transaction, I could use your network.
Yeah, we are not doing payments. We initiate payment instructions on the network.
I see. And the reason why I sort of put myself in the shoes of the bank is because I was thinking about Sean, who is a bank. So he's working, he's a CEO of a bank. So Sean, if you could introduce yourself about your background, how long have you been in this space, and what does DAG Global do?
Great, thank you, Andrew. I have to caveat, we're not a bank yet. We're in the application process, although we will hopefully be one of the first in the UK. That is what I call a crypto-friendly bank. So it's slightly different to IOTA. We're agnostic to DLT specifically, which ones we engage with. But we do intend to facilitate transactions between and among various types of blockchains, as well as specifically crypto. What we're looking to build is very similar to what's been built already in some banks in Switzerland and in the US. And there's a few other jurisdictions around the world, but it's largely a reinvention of the banking model where we can bridge this new sector of digital innovation and allow the traditional fiat or pound sterling, euro, dollar flows to happen on a consistent platform. So our model is eventually to offer custody of digital instruments, to transact between them and traditional instruments, and also to engage in lending against them. And that's where we're active today. Pre-banking license, we can facilitate transactions for lending against Bitcoin, for example. We've done about 100 million of these loans, and we're purely B2B, so it's not a retail play for us. But we're an example of an actor, I would say, operating on top of blockchains or DLT, rather than necessarily an advocate of a specific one.
So if I'm a business and I've got Bitcoin as a collateral, I can essentially borrow real money from you and give you the Bitcoin. Is that the idea?
Yeah, I mean, I would see real money as both sides of that, both the collateral and the borrowers receiving the fiat. But yes, and that's what we do today.
And how do you, so Bitcoin keeps going up and down, right? So it could be 11,000 today, 9,000 tomorrow. So how do you hedge that risk of the collateral's value?
One of the beauties of banking is that at least someone in history has tried to do these kind of things before. Very volatile collateral is consistently featured in various types of structures for loans. This specifically is structured as a repo with a very healthy discount on a loan to value, and then a margin call in case of any instances where the collateral jumps up and down. Being what we hope to be a regulated bank, we take fairly conservative assumptions on both of the above.
So if I send you Bitcoin, you would probably value it like at 4,000 euros. Is that the idea, and hope that that's where it stays?
It depends. Depends on the day of the week.
Depends on, and how long are these loans normally for? How many days, months, weeks?
I mean, it's an interesting use case. There are some actors that provide loans on a daily basis. That's not really our focus. We're looking at longer term opportunities, typically 1 year plus. But there is a market for all different sizes, and it's grown. And in terms of viable business models, I think this is one of them in financial services where there are good spreads and people can make money.
So Daniel, so Sean's business model, I understand. So he's a bank. He works for the bank, which just uses digital assets as collateral. And this is one business model, to make money and create value in the DLT space. Where you sit, have you seen other models of monetizing blockchain and DLT over and above just pure speculation?
Yes. So in our case, we are not involved in the underlying commercial transactions that the members execute on our network. So we provide the network, we provide the rails to share the information and data points, but we are not taking any positions or making payments or giving out loans.
So, and which technological platform are you on? Are you on Hyperledger, or where are you on?
No, on Corda.
On Corda. And
yeah.
why did you choose Corda?
Corda had a much better security point on a transaction level. So you didn't have this channel setup of the Hyperledger, which at the time was a huge impediment for scaling. I know Hyperledger has since we made our decision, obviously improved their channel setup, but Corda was allowed. The key benefit we deliver to our members is data privacy. The data resides on the node within their firewall, inside their firewall. And with our platform and application that is on the node, they can share transaction data with the parties that are involved in the transaction. And only those parties see the transaction data. And that security aspect was not available on Hyperledger or on Ethereum.
So, and is it because the transaction is cryptographically protected so that I can see the data as a third party, but I don't understand what that means, or there's some other mechanism of protection?
No, it's a permission network, so this is private,
So it's totally private, but if I am a part of that permission network, can I still see what's happening on the other nodes?
No, you cannot.
So I cannot. So the way it's built is only those parties that conduct the transaction can see what's happening there.
100% correct. And that's a big critical factor in the business world.
But how is that then a distributed ledger? So then what role, let's say if you and I had a transaction and Wilfried and Sean are still on that network, so what role do they play in that network then?
Yeah, the way Corda works is obviously with cryptographically secured data points between the members, right? And the various nodes that are there. But I'm talking about the content of the commercial transaction. So let's say a bank does 1 million of sale of cars, or a corporate does 1 million sale of cars and want the financing, that data point and what the financing cost was, what the period was, etc. those data points that are business secrecy, right? Because they don't want to share that in public. Those are not available to see for the other parties, other than the ones that are involved in the respective transaction.
And what then sits, let's say, taking that example further, so what would sit on the third party's computers? So not the full database of transactions, like would be the case with Bitcoin, for example?
No.
But what is on our computers? Well, what part of the database is on the third party's computers?
The data that they put themselves there, if they initiate a transaction, or the data they receive from the other members of the network that commercially transact with them.
Okay, and in fact, let's bring in some of our participants, because I think we've got already some upvoted question. And so let me see. So we have question to Wilfried. It's only been voted by 2 people, but I think there are many people interested in that. So are IOTA already utilized in the intended use cases? Is current trading in IOTA driven by pure speculation or for real being in sort of in parentheses, utilization?
Yeah, so today we have IOTA is, let's say, still under development. So it has a roadmap towards its initial vision. And we have implemented a mainnet where the token is traded. Some of the big milestones we're going to go through next year is called the Cotti side, which is the complete decentralization of our network according to our initial vision. So this is going to be for us a big moment of production readiness. And some of our partners are also waiting for that in order to deploy at scale some of their solutions. So the exploitation of IOTA for, let's say, real data transactions or value transactions is not there yet, in my opinion, although we actually do not know what's going on. There's activity on the network. But what I suspect is that based on the conversation with different stakeholders, is that we're going to see this ramping up from now on. So we have recently done an upgrade of the protocol that allows companies to start developing solutions for the production-ready IOTA. And so this is a very important type of step because you will have scalability and a lot of relevant features to really have end-to-end mature solutions. So I think we're going to step now into this domain where IOTA value is going to be impacted by actual real utilization. In my opinion, until now, it has still been very valued by speculation. And it's a very hard and difficult environment, as you say. Andrew, you saw those ups and downs. The market is very irrational, and most of people working the blockchain knows that when Bitcoin goes down, everybody goes down. So there's no decoupling, and that means people don't have yet, their own sort of independence that is aligned to real value creation. So that's what we really seek to achieve with IOTA, actually, is to be linked to the real value and without any fees in the way, right? So there's no secondary manipulation. We don't have any miners that can actually get money from transactions just for maintaining the network. So the IOTA as a feeless token will be completely reflecting over time the value, the pool.
Okay, thank you. And there is another question. In fact, it's been, I've seen it somewhere in the stream. So if many of our webinar participants are, students or MBA students or so young professionals who are interested in learning and developing their personal skills. So Sean, Daniel, if somebody is thinking about having a career in the blockchain DLT type space, so what kind of skills would you look for? So if I came to you as an MBA student from INSEAD or from any other school, and I will ask you, please hire me. What kind of skills would you be looking for? Sean first and Daniel.
I think just indicative in the panel on this webinar, there's really 3 areas I would see that are hiring in the space. One is the likes of IOTA, which are the platforms that they're building to engage actors to operate on. The latter is, or the second is the likes of what Daniel's building, which is a service tool on top of a blockchain, in this case, Corda, which allows firms to engage in those types of activities. Trade finance is a perfect example of a way to use that technology with a good use case. And then the likes of us, where we're probably sitting on top of those two, we will engage with firms, and Daniel, we might engage in future directly as we move into potentially having balance sheet activities. And I think the profiles of those three types of actors in this blockchain space are recruiting different candidate backgrounds. In my case, I'm looking for people with banking experience, but also have an affinity for the new technology. I'm not looking for a technologist first and foremost, if that makes any sense.
Okay, so in fact, if somebody has a background in banking and affinity for technology, but not necessarily a Python coder with 10 years of experience, then they could apply for DAG Global.
Precisely, yeah.
Okay, very good, Danielle. So a person with the general management experience and finance, would you be looking for them, or would you looking for like more technology experts?
No, we can. I would look for technology experts as well as for working capital trade finance experts. And the technology experts, I would split into two categories. One is the real tech geeks, you know, that can develop architecture, work with the architecture, explore it, build partnerships, integration with other networks, etc. And then the second part of the tech skills, I would see tech skills that you can actually sell. So clients, corporates, or partners understand the technology, and you work with their teams to interact and leverage their existing technology to connect to the network. And then the working capital trade finance skill is really nothing to do with technology. It's really a matter of supporting the use cases that are executed on the Marco Polo network.
Okay, so that's a pretty broad spectrum of skills between even Sean and Danielle's companies. And Wilfried, what about you? So when people come to you and they're looking for a job, what kind of skills are you guys looking for?
So, I mean, at the protocol layer, most of my colleagues are in the deep tech, right? So those are cryptographers or developers. They're really into the distributed ledger technology and coding. We have a whole engineering departments, and we are developing new open source products. So you need to have really the tech side. A part of the team is involved in market adoption. So it's catalyzing all those partnerships that we discussed today. And there the talent is really to translate something that is quite complicated. In addition, you know, we are coming up with some new sort of functionalities, and we need to translate this and bring them down to a level that is shaped as benefits to the industry. And the language is completely different. And I think the past years has proven that it's actually quite difficult to be able to jungle with one part of the brain in deep tech and then the other part with a language that is just around problems to be solved, right? You have a problem, you need to solve it, and you need to just position the technology as an enabling technology, not as the end. And we do this, of course, every day. But there's a skill that I found needed in the general industry, I think, and it's not necessarily blockchain specific, but that's also one of the reasons why I was so keen to involve INSEAD in the first place, but it has to do with leadership development in the context of digital transformation. It takes some specific skills in terms of leadership and defining a purpose for your own organization in order to dare and initiate innovative process of which you don't necessarily know the end result. And many organizations, I think, a big enterprise suffer from being static, right? They think they know what is their business model for the next 10 years. But as we've discussed today, there may be a lot of new alternatives. And so you will see a distinction between the enterprises that are second or third wave, and then you have the new future market leaders, and they will go for completely different types of business model, a way to interact with other companies, defining new value chains.
Okay, I see. And this is actually, so about the new business models, there is a question Hernan is asking, how can startups build appealing business models based on DLT technologies versus traditional supply chains? So I guess the way I would sort of rephrase that question, so you have startups who are looking to innovate, and they could innovate either in the traditional supply chain or based on DLT. So, what would be some business models that these startups could follow, which would sort of utilize the DLT features that would allow them to improve on the traditional supply chains? So, any one of you, if you can chip in, and maybe it's a very specialized question, but if you have any insight, we would be happy to hear that.
Yeah, I think if I can take a stab at it, everybody's trying hard to DLT is an enabler that powers business model. It's not a business model on its own. So standalone, not very useful. So we build our decentralized platform and apps on top of the DLT and host in the cloud and provide connectivity with APIs. And it's this package that creates the business model. And the way we are delivering this package to our members is a combination of license fees and transaction fees for the usage of the network, with different engagement models for SMEs, corporates, small banks, large banks, ecosystem partners. And I think that's where it's not one size fits all. You really have to have a dynamic business model and value proposition, because it's different. An SME that uses one product with one bank has a different appetite to participate in a business model or to pay than a large corporate that has multi-product, multi-bank requirements and needs. And I think they all get multiple benefits, but it is very differentiated.
Wilfried, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I mean, in our domain, there's a lot of needs on different levels. So we work in, eventually it's going to be related to IoT, right? So there's a sort of hardware interface where there's a lot of our own startups working at that level, bringing the DLT into the hardware, and the hardware has specifications for specific use case. So if it's supply chain, then it's going to be very adapted to the case related to global trade or supply chain. There's some companies that are now not anymore startups, but they work on the platform. So everything is a company that provides this type of platform, so supply chain tracking, and they utilize different type of technologies, including blockchain, and IOTA is part of the options. And so this is, they are the interface to the clients, and they leverage on the DLT. I think one of the mistakes I would argue from a startup point of view is that is often done on DLT is that people may start with a fascination around DLT, right? As Daniel mentioned. For a startup, it would be much more viable to just know exactly who's the customer and understand the needs. And you can keep DLT as an enabling factor that you will probably have to bring on in the forefront as part of an ecosystem play, right? So the startup could be an engine to say, we can address your needs, client, we can address your need, but we're going to address it with a much more collaborative approach. And we will be the front runner, and we'll bring an ecosystem with us, and we'll be on your behalf much more agile in bringing those parties together. Yeah, I think that's something quite important. Otherwise, startups may have a fascination on the DLT or the tech only, and that's very dangerous. Client access and client needs are the most important to understand.
And this is, I think, this is not specific to DLT. So there is all this, excitement in the market of AI, right? And everything. Now all the startups are saying, well, we are an AI-enabled startup, but in reality, they may be not. So the point is not sort of say I'm a DLT startup or an AI startup, but you probably need to solve a specific customer problem. even do it better than competition, irrespective of are you in the sort of, are you using AI or DLT or some combination of other technologies to solve it? So this question was to Wilfried, but I think it would be interesting to all of the panelists here. So the person is asking, I agree with you on trends on integrated tech towards the vision of creating smart cities, but where do you see the impact of the adoption of innovative technology on emerging countries? And let's sort of broaden this from just the smart cities. But do you folks have any examples of how emerging markets, developing countries, how they are using distributed ledger technologies? It would be very interesting, I think, to our participants.
If I may, I think one area that's fascinating right now is what China is doing in terms of the payment networks. We've seen a lot of innovation with the likes of WeChat and Alipay in terms of facilitating payments via mobile apps in a way that is much more efficient than the network of payment infrastructure in the West. And now, because of the innovation around central bank digital currencies, we're seeing the Chinese central bank issuing a digital renminbi, which is live as we speak. And they are at the fore in this new innovation. And I think these types of things, particularly for an emerging market to be pushing ahead, if you can still call China an emerging market, I think you can, and being one of the first to innovate, it's because they don't have the legacy infrastructure and the likes of the payment rails that the Western banks have adopted. They've been able to leapfrog, and that's something I think, if you look at the broader area of clearing and settlement for financial services generally, and here I'm wearing my banker hat as opposed to the broader IOT and DLT hat. I think there's numerous examples of, as Daniel mentioned, not just using the tech layer, but building the apps on top of it, the use cases that in certain countries, because there isn't that legacy infrastructure to overcome, they can potentially implement more quickly.
Okay, so payment and digital currencies that the banks are issuing. Okay, any other examples, Wilfried, Daniel?
Well, on our side, we work with the Trademark East Africa on supply chain and global trade to demonstrate the cost efficiency gain of implementing IOTA for transparency and channeling, accelerating, removing all the frictions across the supply chain. So this is not necessarily restricted to developed economies. I mean, you have African global trade is going everywhere, and there's an increasing push now also to ensure ethical provenance or sustainability tracking type of feature. So this is an area where it's not for developed economies only. We're talking about a global trade environment where we really want to sort of trace where things are coming from. There's a domain myself I'm very fascinated by, which is to be able to, I mean, in some developing economies, they rely on international funding, for example, from international banks and so on. And if you look at what happened in the past, in order to avoid corruption and ensure the delivery of those big infrastructure projects, they went for the bigger projects. Right? Bigger project, you know where it is. When we bring the IOTA and IoT vision, we're going to be able to bring transparency all the way to the edge. So there's a new opportunity to funnel investments or funding from international bank all the way to the developed economies and basically track locally what is going to happen. So bringing transparency and channeling money flow in a new way, I think that's going to be a very interesting potential to look at.
So Daniel, your perspective on the emerging markets?
Like it was said, the technology doesn't have any country borders, right? Can be used everywhere. Specifically, we are working also on the ESG space with Carbon Chain and Rainforest Alliance to digitize their certificates and bring them into the financial world. So cheaper financing can be executed. And this is often in the emerging markets where you have the agricultural sector and commodity sector. We are also working with, or we started talking to the development banks. The development banks like Asia Development Banks or EBRD or IFC are the banks that are supporting the banking systems in the emerging markets. And they equally have a guarantee program to help them. That is, in today's world, it's email and PDFs, right? And we can help them to fully digitize their guarantee to the benefit of the banks and ultimately to the benefit of the buyers and sellers in the emerging markets. So there's a huge applicability and potential to the emerging markets. This is not just a Western play at all.
Okay, thank you.
As a matter of fact, I would like to point out, IOTA Foundation is a member of INADBA, which is an international association for trusted blockchain applications that we were part of co-founding. And we're running right now a social a survey to invite all the blockchain applications working with social impact and climate in general. So we're creating a sort of repository and a status around how the technology is utilized for those types of force for good, as we said INSEAD.
Lovely. So let me ask one more question to you, Wilfried, and we'll probably be wrapping up afterwards. And maybe if you gentlemen, Sean and Danielle, can add to that as well. So as a consultancy company, what would be the best way to start in Wilfried's case with IOTA, or in case of Danielle and Sean with their businesses? So if there is a consultancy company that could provide some help to you or to your partners, so what would be the way that they could work with you?
So for our case, we do this already with different type of consultancy. So IT integrators and consultants are essential, and they maintain the sort of the main contact to the clients, and they're closer to the clients generally. So what they can do is to simply subcontract IOTA to be the IOTA experts, especially when they need to ramp up their capabilities on our technology. So we do those types of assignments where we are part of a joint bid towards a client, and we bring the IOTA expertise. And so we have different existing parties like this. We've been also invited then to ramp up also the capabilities of those companies by doing different hackathons or different initiatives internal to the company. And one could envision actually doing this jointly, so that the client can come at the premise of an IT company and bring us along, so we can share some of our expertise and insights around the market potential.
Okay, thank you, Danielle. Do you folks work with outside consultancies, and so how could they be involved with you?
I think the way they could be involved with us is really to focus on the corporates, on the buyers and sellers, and explain them the use cases, and explain them the technology used, and explain them how they can easily connect without having the necessity of creating a huge tech project that takes multiple years and costs multiple millions of dollars. But instead, the tech setup is the easy bit, to engage, to spin up a node and a platform and to set up a client, is done in an afternoon. And to give access, but the critical aspect is really the aspect of the business case. And then the other thing that comes to my mind, the big challenge we have in the deployment of our business cases is all the legal engagement. The legal engagement, because we are I'm looking for the right word. We are fronting the Corda access. So you have the access to the Corda node, the access to our platform. You have lots of liability issues and liability questions. You have all these sanctions and all that. So the legal aspect, that the corporates and the banks need help on the legal side as well. So if I was a consultant, I would focus on those two areas.
Okay, thank you. Sean, do you guys work with consultants?
Yes, of course. And a lot of them, as Daniel mentioned, are lawyers or regulatory compliance experts. We have a fairly big budget where we deploy for guidance in both the UK, and we're looking now in Gibraltar for additional activities. In addition to that, obviously IT integration consultants, because we have to understand the technology of the platforms we're building on. GDPR is a big thing because of the need to secure data. And the last area where we're doing a lot of work is on the AML KYC piece, so digital identity, which is one of the few overlaps we probably would have as a business with IOTA, in terms of making sure that you can use the blockchain or DLT to trace the flows of funds, and then you're only engaging with good actors.
All right, well, yeah, please.
On that part, now, I wanted to also mention, when you think about consultants, there's another category that people may not think about, but academia is very important because this is where the new talents are coming from. So we work actually a lot with academic partners, and they are a key essential part of those minimal viable ecosystems.
Okay, and what can academic partners bring to IOTA?
Most of the universities and academic partners have research expertise, for instance, on the legal issues, right? So when we think about GDPR aspects, we've recently launched a cooperation with the University in Oslo to tackle digital identity using IOTA and the GDPR related compliance aspect that will emerge out of our innovation work. They have the experts, and there's the linkage to the students, right? So this is where the new talent is going to come from. So we are proactively engaged by providing exposure to our technology, and we'd love the idea to bridge enterprise needs to the new talent. So we're trying to actually figure out a way to orchestrate this, and to some extent we are succeeding to trigger this in NTNU, also in Trondheim, an example I provided where you have a big cooperation between the university, the municipality, and businesses around the smart city context.
Well, that sounds great. So it looks like this ecosystem of DLT technologies, not just around IOTA, but around the DLT as a whole, is growing. There are new use cases that people might have thought about back in 2017, but now it seems like we have at least 2 companies which are building that business model. Of course, we have IOTA on sort of an underlying potential innovation in many different spaces, including the collaborations between private and public partnerships. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me. The audience, thank you very much for your engagement and questions. And I suppose, if you want to reach out to any of the 3 panelists about their businesses or collaboration with consultants, or maybe if you have an amazing resume and you want to work for either IOTA or DAG or Marco Polo Network, I would suggest maybe find a way to send your materials to them. This is a growing area, lots of exciting stuff is happening, and we're all looking forward to learning both from the panelists, from Wilfried, Sean, and Daniel, and also from the attendees about how you are implementing DLT-enabled business models. Thank you very much. Don't forget, again, November 5, we have the next webinar on blockchain for supply chains. That's November 5. And Tuesday, November 10, we're going to have a session on the paradox of privacy. So lots of new and exciting stuff is coming from INSEAD your way. Do stay with us, do stay engaged, stay healthy, and hopefully we'll see you at some of our next events. Thank you very much. This was Andrew Shipilov live from Fontainebleau. Thank you.